Hey everyone. I am here today to talk about a couple different things. First, I'm here to talk to you about the book Holes. And then this was part of the banned book challenge I was doing. And then I've decided I'm going to stop. I'm gonna, this will be the last part of the challenge I'll be doing. I won't be continuing from here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why, and then just generally about book banning and book challenges going on throughout the U.S. right now. So first of all, we'll talk about the book. Holes is obviously super popular. It's won a ton of awards, tons of acclaim. I've been saying forever I was going to read it at some point, and just haven't really gotten around to it. I got to be honest, it never really appealed to me. I was too old when it came out to be like in the target audience. And even though sometimes, I'll read books that I may not be in the target audience and I can still enjoy, it didn't really seem like something I would like necessarily anyway. So, but I thought this was a good time because it is such a popular book and such a famous book. And, it is banned. It has been challenged. So, the book itself, if you're not familiar, you probably are because it's like super popular and there's also a super popular movie. But the book is about a kid who is accused of a crime he didn't commit and is sent to this essentially camp in the desert in Texas. And it is a correctional facility / camp. Definitely some elements of magic realism or I don't even know, questionable reality because, just, some of the things you're like, how would this be legal? But basically this group of kids, who have been put in this correctional camp, their option is jail or the camp basically. And they go out into the desert all day and they dig holes. And, our main character, Stanley Yelnats, says that, he's innocent. And he kind of references how his great-great-grandfather was cursed, and the whole family has been cursed since, and his great-great-grandfather, we get a little of his backstory kind of just sprinkled in throughout the book, and I'll be honest, some of, how the backstory gets, thrown in to the current, there's not a lot of transition in those sections, so it just does kind of feel thrown in there. Which for me, I really wasn't I was I feel like we need something different done, structurally. But anyway, so one of the reasons the book is really, really popular is because it's, at the time it was really, there weren't a lot of books about kids in correctional institutions and, kind of in a positive way. Obviously not positive toward correctional institutions, but toward the kids. And, kind of demonstrating, that even kids who maybe are troubled, so-called troubled kids, that they have the same sort of desires and skills and relationship abilities that, any kid has. And so, and I agree with that. The kids they feel like any group of kids, any book you would read about any group of kids, so if you're reading it or you're reading Holes, there doesn't feel like much of a difference, even though the fact that these are supposedly criminal kids, and some are and some aren't, and what we don't really get a lot into what they did. So, and then another thing that the book was praised for, and again, this was pretty rare at the time, is that the characters are pretty diverse. And so we have, a couple of the kids are white, a couple of the kids are Hispanic, a couple of the kids are black, and there's not really, it's mentioned, but it's not, obviously it's important that they have that diversity, but, that's not their character, they're not just, the black kid, or the Hispanic kid, and it's a really nice, it's just about a group of kids, and it's kind of a secondary thing that they just happen to be a diverse group of kids. And that's really how it should be done. Because in reality, when you go to school with kids or, school or when you're working with adults or you have a group of friends, hopefully you're not thinking of like, okay, so this is my group of friends and here are my, 2 black friends and 2 Hispanic friends and 2 gay friends. Like, hopefully no one thinks like that. So, so I think it was one of the first that really was kind of like reflective of, the makeup of realistically a group of kids, any group of kids that you would take. And so the story basically is kind of about the holes, but it's also about, we discover that basically, there's, the warden of this camp has sort of ulterior motives. There's a treasure possibly. And so in terms of the overall plot of this book, like I just really didn't care. I will say it's like a very easy read. It's only like 200 and something pages. So it's not, it wasn't like the time spent reading it, even though I didn't really like the book, like the time spent reading it wasn't like a ton of time. I wasn't bored. I just didn't really care. So at the end of the book, I was just like, I get it for other people, but it's just not for me. And one of the things I really did like about the book is there's this other story that's like in the past, about this outlaw, Kate Barlow, and she was a teacher. And then, she was really like respected in her community, and she made like some kind of like peaches basically, that she canned peaches. And then there was another guy in the community named Sam, and he grew onions and sold onions, and a lot of the people in the community, this was like obviously in the 1800s, a lot of people in the community would go to him as well as to the local doctor, and he would have like folk cures that involved onions, and they never really knew what like healed anybody. But the sad kind of story here is that, Kate and Sam, had a relationship, and they were seen kissing, and he was black and she was white, and so then the community decided to basically run them out of town, and it was like a whole thing, and so that was kind of the catalyst for some things that happen now, and that was like, to be honest, that was my favorite part of the book, and I was like, can I just read a book about like Kate and Sam, because that was way more interesting to me. But, again, I'm an adult, and so I'm probably more interested in that topic than I am in, just a bunch of kids at a camp digging holes. And, it's pretty straightforward and redundant. Like, they dig holes, and it sucks, and that's basically the plot. So, that being said, at the end of the book, I was like, there is literally nothing offensive in this book. If you want to be the kind of person who like wants to pretend that like, kids who go to correctional institutions, or that they deserve to be abused, that bullying is okay. I don't know. I guess then that you would be upset by it, but otherwise, like, bullying is a real thing. It's pretty violent. Horrible things happen. Kids deal with horrible things. There's an element of violence, but it's not like absurd amounts of violence. It's definitely nothing like out of the grade level. This is written for like middle grade / YA. It's, even though the characters are 14, it's really more of a middle grade book. And I think even the author said it was like targeted to like 10 and 11 year olds. So it's like what, 4th, 5th grade. And so that led me to looking up like why it was challenged, because I couldn't possibly think of anything. And the reason it was challenged is for exactly that. It was read aloud in some 4th and 5th grade classes, and parents didn't want their kids reading it. They thought it was inappropriate for the kids. And yeah, I don't agree. I just don't think there was anything in it that was inappropriate. I can't, I'm just thinking back to what I was reading at like 10 and 11 years old, or, in 4th and 5th grade. And I read like Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl has like some pretty like dark stuff. Narnia has violence, and that's from like 2nd grade. So yeah, I don't know what kids are reading that is like innocent, and I don't know. I just didn't think it was inappropriate. So that brings me to sort of this challenge and like what I've discovered. So I've now read 9 books for the challenge, and with every single one of them, like, I haven't found a reason for them to be banned. And that was kind of, I mean, I anticipated I wouldn't, because I came into this challenge with like ultimately the goal of more like education, like bringing exposure to the fact that there are all these book challenges and book bans happening. And like, these are the books, and this is the topic that people are upset about. And these are the conversations we should be having, rather than, just removing access to these books. So I kind of like, that was how I was approaching it. I was going to read books I hadn't read before, because I have read a lot of the stuff on the banned book lists, just through my English degrees and, throughout my life. I've been an avid reader since I was a really little kid. And so I was like, okay, which books haven't I read? And let me see if I can, try to understand. So I have focused heavily on middle grade and YA, because that's, I think, more of the issues stem from schools and school libraries and parents challenging things in school libraries. But what has resulted from the challenge is every single book that I've shared, I have ended up in conversations with people, some here, but mainly, in other outlets, whether personally or on like Discords or, just in general and other other outlets, where I find myself having to defend the books. And like, not that I'm opposed to defending books. I mean, I'm going to defend books, but I'm not very comfortable with like a lot of conflict, with a lot of, I have a lot of really bad like PTSD and a lot of social anxiety because of PTSD and from things like bullying and assault and, things that have happened throughout my life. And I don't do very well. I get very like, obviously I'm not doing well in relative comparison to humanity. Like, I can't be on camera. I struggle to talk to people a lot of the time. I have like periods where I literally can't communicate with anyone. So generally I don't do that well, but what I do well and what I think I'm good at is I really, really love to read, and I love talking about books, and I love sharing books that I love and talking to people about why I love books. But as you've probably noticed, like, I really try to focus more on the books I love, and I like doing like top lists and books I really enjoy, and I don't really like talking about books I don't like. I'm going to be honest. I will tell you, okay, I read this book and I didn't like it and it wasn't for me. I'll try if possible to say something positive about it. Like, I didn't love Holes, but, again, I can see why people would. But that's like, I'm not one who does things like worst 10 books I've read. Like, I don't need to do that. Like, I don't need, and I know that that's like, that'd be the smart thing to do if I wanted to, like, get the algorithm up there and all that, but that's just not my nature. I don't like conflict. I don't like getting in arguments. I just want to talk about books I like, and I just, like, books to me are one of the only things, it's a source of comfort for me. And so, I am very, very much opposed to banning books. And so, having done this challenge, thinking I was going to be kind of presenting to people within a sort of bookish community, about books, and being like, hey, doesn't it suck that people are trying to ban books? Let's talk about some of the books that are banned. Can you believe they banned these? Having to then like defend those books and defend reading them is just too much for me. So I can't do it anymore. And I will continue to read. I had like stocked up on some banned books, and I got some from the library. And so, I will read them and I will put them in my recap, and I will mention if they were banned, but I'm just not going to keep doing these like banned book videos. I'm done at 9. I'm not going to read 24 for the year. again, I've read a ton of the stuff on the ALA banned book list. So, yeah. And then, at some point I might talk in general about banned books if something else happens. But so the last part of this is I did wanted to say is like, I have never been an advocate for book banning. I have never supported it. I will never support it. I don't care what it is. I mean, in reality, I would way prefer that a library have some of the most offensive, awful material and have access to that than to not have access to things that are needed or that are good. Or I just think that, I'm a huge proponent of the First Amendment, and that is going to mean that I'm going to have to hear things and see things that I don't like. And that's fine, because I would so much rather have that out there, have variety, have people, different perspectives, than be told how to think or what to read or what to be able to look at and watch. And not because I'm like, I want things that are offensive. I just think that it's a very, very dangerous path. Once you open the door to banning a book, once you say that, well, this one maybe is too much, okay, so, 500 people agree that one is too much. And they say, we're going to ban that, and then another book comes along, and now another 500 people are upset by that book, and they're like, it's too much for us. And so maybe some of those first 500 people agree, and maybe some of them don't. But now eventually, at some point, everything is going to upset somebody, because everyone has different experiences. Everyone reads things a little differently. Everyone, something could really be off-putting to one person that isn't to another. And the biggest challenge here is what that does when you do that in schools and when you do that in libraries. You are now limiting access to knowledge and to information. And I understand that for a lot of these banning groups and these challenges, that's what they want. They don't want their kids to learn about homosexuality. They don't want their kids to hear about, the generational trauma that comes from families that, have been systemically oppressed. They don't want to see that. They don't want their kids to deal with that. They don't want to have those conversations with their children. And while I understand that, I feel like that is a personal decision, and then you can decide what comes in and out of your home, but you don't get to decide for anybody else. And the library serves the community, the school serves the community, and that means everyone in the community. And so I can guarantee you there is not one book in any school or in any library that 100% of the community is either opposed to or loves. That's just the nature of us, of human beings. Even everyone's favorite things, it's like Shawshank Redemption has like a 98% or something on Rotten Tomatoes, but there's still 2% who don't like it. There's always going to be people who don't like something. And not everyone has the same resources. And so it's very easy to say, well, they can just go to the bookstore and buy it. I don't think it has to be in the library. Okay, but not everyone has the money to go to the bookstore. Not everyone has access to a bookstore. Some kids are going home and their parents don't really read, and they don't have, either they don't want to spend money on books or they do not have the money to spend on books. And so it's just not anyone's place to decide what other people should have access to. And so, I have always, this has been my life, when I was very young, and my parents weren't, my parents are, I would say they're fairly moderate. I mean, I guess I grew up in Massachusetts, so I mean, in comparison, they're probably a little more left-leaning, but fairly socially definitely middle, but even, when I was growing up, they would rather have had the conversation. And my mom might be more conservative than my dad. My dad is a little more open, and I could get into all kinds of things about their levels of education, their own personal backgrounds, why that might be the case. But I'm not going to do that because that's not the point. But when I was very young, my parents would, I talked to them about book banning. And this was when I was, very young, like second, third grade. I had heard about, books being challenged, and I'd seen something about banned book week or something. And I remember talking to my parents about it. And all through middle school, I was very interested in this. And then into high school, obviously. But by high school, I was a lot more independent, and I would just kind of do my own thing. My parents pretty much at that point weren't really checking in on what I was reading or doing. They knew what I was doing, but they weren't like, I was kind of had some freedom to make my own decisions at that point in terms of what I was reading. But in middle school in particular, I would say in early middle school, so our middle school is 4 to 8. So, from 4th to 6th grade, I would say that was when my parents were like probably the most involved in like what I was picking, because before that, like in elementary school, it was mostly what was in school that I knew about because I didn't, have a lot of access to books, and I was still only allowed in the children's library, and my parents would help me pick out books. But then when I started getting to be able to go and pick out my own books, we'd start going to bookstores, and my parents would let me go into the bookstore and like kind of go off on my own in the bookstore and like shop and pick out my own books. So that was when we started really having conversations about what I was reading. And like my parents, what's funny is they took my Sweet Valley High for me because they read the back of one and it was something about like someone having sex. And I wasn't allowed to read those in 5th grade. They like hid them in my dad's workshop. But I was reading Stephen King and Danielle Steele, and that was fine. So I don't know. I don't know that it was just as much as that there was sex in those. I think it was more that like they were a little more nervous about the teenagers having sex than adults having sex, I guess. Or they just weren't really thinking. But I do know that my parents made a point of every year, like when Banned Book Week would come out at the local library or, school, I would bring like the list home and we would talk about them. And my parents would recommend books or be like, oh, you'd probably really like this one. And so we made a point, and they made a point for me to try to read as many as I could. So, that's how I first read To Kill a Mockingbird. That's how I read Catcher in the Rye. That's how I read things that I was eventually going to read in school, but my parents were like trying to encourage me to read them even earlier. And it was, again, so this is kind of my personal values, is that I just think reading is so important. I think education is important, and I think access is important. But for my own mental well-being, I can't continue to get in arguments. I can't try to defend books because I feel like I've been pretty clear on how I feel about it. And, I wasn't really going into this challenge to hear out people's rationale for wanting to ban a book and seeing if I agreed. I'm not going to agree. I'm never going to agree. And I always thought it was more about can you believe this stuff is happening? It's 2024 and here we are still challenging and banning books. And, so it's been a lot, and I think it's just too much for me personally, and I apologize, but, I'm just not in the place where, I'm trying to find the places that are comfortable for me, so I don't end up, I've had a few ups and downs even in the last year, here, and some of them have been, I've gone kind of away for a bit, and I don't want to have to do that. So I'm trying to find the best way to keep up and keep things up and try to stay, okay. So anyway, that's that. So I appreciate you listening to all of this, and I'll see you around. Bye.